Yo people, I hope you're doing well. I'm back with you today for a new video on Forza Horizon 5, a video in which we're going to talk a little bit about car improvement, since many of you are discovering the Forza Horizon franchise with Forza Horizon 5. Many of you are a bit confused about the improvement system in Forza Horizon 5. So, some have asked me, well, if I could make a little guide video to introduce you to the improvement system a bit. They also may advise you on potential car improvements. To, possibly, give you a little boost to get off to a good start on Forza Horizon 5. So that's what I'm going to do in this video, which will be divided into two parts. First part, presentation of improvements. I'm going to explain a little bit about each piece, what it's really going to change on your car. In the second part of the video, I'll share some tips on how I improve my cars, which might give you ideas on how to enhance your own vehicles. Knowing that I'm not necessarily the best player, I have all the Forza games since Motorsport 2, including all the Forza Horizon titles. I'm very familiar with the physics due to spending many hours over many years playing Forza. I still know more or less well what works in relation to the game's physics to have high-performance cars. So, let's get started. We will start with the conversion. Ah yes, one last little detail I forgot in this video. We will only talk about improvement. We will not really talk about adjustment. Know that obviously, once your car is improved in the game, you then have the opportunity to adjust several performance parts on your car. To optimize your car in terms of handling, in terms of braking, in terms of speed and acceleration, that I will talk about in a separate video, because the settings, it's quite long to explain, the improvements too. And I don't want to make an hour-long video. I prefer to make two 20-minute or 30-minute videos, rather than making a big 1-hour one. It will be more engaging for all, in my view. We'll begin with conversions on this YouTube channel. What are the most radical improvements available on Forza Horizon 5 cars? So, there can be up to 4 categories of improvements: engine modifications, drivetrain modifications, aspiration, and, on some cars, body kits as well. While this car doesn't have it, other cars like the Toyota Supra 5, Supra 4, or Mazda RX-7 do, and you can start the game with them. I believe there are quite a few models that have it in the game. These body kits, let's say, already made. And generally, these body kits, well, first of all, they are quite stylish, but above all, they increase the downforce. So the road holding, let's say, at high speed of quite a few cars, since they have aerodynamics, let's say, a little more refined. However, generally, these body kits make your car heavier than the same car improved in the same way, without these body kits. So, depending on what you want to do, it's not necessarily super interesting. After, let's say that body kits, in general, people put them on mainly because it's stylish. Then you have the engine modification, so that's a pretty extreme modification. Because basically, you're going to remove the base engine of your car and replace it with the engine of another car. So there are models on which you can have 5, 6, or 7, or 8 different swaps, let's say. 8 different engines on this one. On this 83 Golf GTI. So we have the base engine, which is a naturally aspirated engine that does, if I'm not mistaken, 1,780 cubic centimeters, that's 1 liter 8. And if you wish, you can replace it with this engine here, the Turbo Rally, which is a smaller displacement engine, but which is a turbo engine, and therefore offers more power. The model also appears in Forza Horizon 5. Overall, the swap has an advantage. It's that on many cars, the swaps allow to get simply more powerful engines, with more torque. The main concern? Generally, you're going to lose, let's say, well, the bass sound of your car since it's going to be replaced by the sound. Let's say of the engine that you're going to change, that you're going to swap on your car. It can be interesting if you're looking for maximum performance. Afterwards, if for example your goal is not necessarily to have very high power, the swap is not necessarily very interesting. If here, our goal for example is to make a Golf that does 250 horsepower, we won't need to switch to the Rally Turbo to reach them. So there's this modification which is already a big change. Then, you have the drivetrain modification that's going to change the type of transmission in your car. This car is a front-wheel drive or front-wheel drive, as indicated at the bottom of the screen. Basically, it's the front wheels of the car that transmit the engine's power to the ground and thus, in quotes, move the car forward. You have the option, on all cars generally front-wheel drive like this one, the front-wheel drive to switch them to rear-wheel drive. So here, these are rear-wheel drive cars. So basically, it changes. Instead of the front wheels transmitting the power, it's the rear wheels and you have all-wheel drive, so that's it. In four-wheel drive, all 4 wheels of the car transmit power. There are models in general, cars that are basically rear-wheel drive. Generally, you only have the option to put the all-wheel drive transmission. And generally, On cars that are in all-wheel drive, so in four-wheel drive, you generally only have the rear-wheel drive that is available. In these drivetrain modifications, changing the drivetrain may not be necessary or useful for all vehicles. On a car like this that makes, let's say, only about 100 horsepower, putting four-wheel drive has no point since it will weigh down the car more than anything else. Switching to four-wheel drive increases the transmission and overall car weight. Beyond a certain power level, it can be interesting to switch. The type of vehicle you drive, particularly small, front-wheel drive cars, will determine your driving experience. It is indeed more interesting from 400 horsepower or 300-400 horsepower to switch them to four-wheel drive to distribute the power throughout the car. Rear-wheel drive cars may offer slightly better acceleration compared to front-wheel drive vehicles. The problem is that small sizes, small cars like that, in rear-wheel drive. If you start to put more than 300 or 400 horsepower, these are going to be cars that will easily start drifting in turns, and that's not necessarily what we want. And generally, small cars that drift are harder to control than medium or large-size cars. However, a rear-wheel drive car, a basic rear-wheel drive which is on a slightly larger size, when it starts to exceed 500 or 600 horsepower, then playing it in four-wheel drive, so an all-wheel drive can be quite interesting, since it will allow you to better manage the power on your car. While driving a 1000 HP rear-wheel drive car is fun in the game, it's not usually the most optimized for speed. Afterwards, cars that are four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive mean the same thing. Forza Horizon 5 has a minor issue despite being easier to control. Generally, these are cars that don't perform as well. Without adjustment in the corners, it's said that it understeers, it goes straight in the corners, which can be quite annoying. Adjustments can fix this, but it may be difficult if you're not used to making them. The extent of improvements will vary greatly depending on the specific changes you make. Personally, I really do it based on the size of the car and its power. Below a certain power, the four-wheel drive is useless. We will then move on to the last type of conversion, aspiration. So, this car has a classic atmospheric engine. We can therefore switch to turbo or supercharger. So, in the game, there are several types of turbo and several types of supercharger. Turbochargers come in single and twin varieties, while superchargers include the volumetric and screw types. The advantage on Forza Horizon 5 is that any naturally aspirated engine that you switch to turbo or supercharger will output more power than if it was simply a naturally aspirated engine. However, there is a disadvantage to switching these engines to turbo or supercharger. That is, you're going to lose a bit of the linearity of the power. A naturally aspirated engine can be pleasant in turns and help maintain control, compared to a car with a big turbo that brings sudden power at high revs, which can be surprising and cause loss of control. Generally, a naturally aspirated engine is much easier to understand and predict, to anticipate in terms of behavior in turns. Then, between turbo and supercharger. There too, there are small advantages, small disadvantages, depending on the type of aspiration you are going to put. Turbo, in general, it's really to get the maximum power, except that in general the power, you will only get it late in the revs, and so it can be a bit tricky in turns. It's quite fun actually. A big turbo that blows hard and outputs a big bonus power, it's always quite amusing. Additionally, there are superchargers. Superchargers output less power than turbos, but the advantage of superchargers is that the power comes earlier and in a less brutal way, let's say. This can be interesting for road holding, and this can also be interesting, depending on the type of engine, depending on the type of track you have played on. On small accelerations, small straight lines for example, a supercharger will allow you to output power earlier than a turbo. Everyone can modify their car as they wish, but it's important to know that changing the aspiration type will also alter the vehicle's sound. Some cars will sound better or worse depending on whether they have an atmospheric, turbocharged, or supercharged engine. That's a lot of info about conversions all at once, I know. Feel free to rewind or pause the video as needed. It's just one of the enhancements in Forza Horizon 5. Let's now focus on traditional improvements, specifically engine enhancements, which will depend on the engine you chose earlier during the conversion process. So, here, we left the base engine, the original drivetrain, so we will be able to improve it on top of that. So I'm just going to put the turbo like that on top. I could also show you the turbo improvements. Without that, we won't have any available. Switching to a supercharger will provide several stages of improvement compared to other aspiration types. In this video, we'll focus on turbochargers, but similar improvements apply to superchargers as well. So you have the engine improvements. The engine improvements are straightforward to comprehend. They will all increase the power of your car. Some of them are still quite special in quotes. Well, first of all, the turbos and compressors you will be able to improve depending on what you chose earlier. And there is also the camshaft, which, when improved, will allow you to go higher in the revs. So, for example, it will allow you, on this car, to go from a limiter that is at about 7,000 revs to almost 8,000 revs. So, you can see this by looking a little at the red curve and the yellow curve, which are at the bottom of the performance gauge. So, this generally allows you to have cars that run at a higher speed. This changes the sound of the cars a bit. It makes a slightly higher pitched sound. And it allows you to get more power out. Overall, it's a big engine improvement, that's for sure. The rest is just adding power. Keep in mind that upgrading your exhaust will also change your car's sound, depending on the upgrade stage you choose. Unfortunately, in Forza Horizon 5, cars with racing exhaust sound worse than those with the original exhaust. So, if you're just driving, let's say, for a ride and you just want a car that sounds good, don't necessarily upgrade the exhaust. While counterproductive at that level, it still offers a nice improvement in terms of pure power addition. I've made some improvements. This will let me show you a bit of what I generally do on cars. We then have the platform and handling improvements, which are quite useful as well. Improving brakes is logical. The more you improve them, the more braking power and better braking you will have. So that, in general, is something that can be easily improved. You put it to the max, at least, the maximum possible, without, let's say, exceeding the performance index you want to target. And this will allow you to have better braking, springs, and shock absorbers. So here, depending on the type, obviously, of event you are going to do, it's going to change things quite a bit. Overall, if you do asphalt racing, classic road racing, the best, obviously, will be the racing shock absorbers. Then, if it ever exceeds the performance goal you want to achieve, the targeted performance index, as I was talking about a moment ago, leaving the sport or road can be interesting at times. When discussing targeted performance goals, I didn't specify the context. The car class is 500, for example, 400. 76. Let's imagine that we want to keep this car in class 500 and we still want to improve it. The springs and shocks. In these cases, I would put the sport shocks because the races, unfortunately, will take me out of category 500 and will get me into category 100. Additionally, there are special off-road shocks and springs. It's quite logical. It's for those who want to make off-road prepared cars. Whether it's for rally or for anything that's going to be cross-country. The tracks with many jumps and elevation changes can be quite interesting. And alongside that, the drift springs and shock absorbers that will increase the camber of the wheels. Basically, you can see that here, the wheels are slightly tilted outward, unlike the more classic suspensions, where the wheels are a bit more straight. This allows you to slightly increase the ease with which you can drift with your cars. So, overall, drift shocks and springs still allow for a good drift car base. So, that will obviously depend on what type of improvement you want to make. Then you have the anti-roll bars, which therefore allow you to limit the roll. So the roll basically is when the car, when you're in a turn, it starts to strafe, to move to the side more than it should. Rather than turning, it will behave like a bar of soap and begin sliding sideways. So, without necessarily drifting, but you're going to feel it start to sway a little bit, so to speak. The anti-roll bars are there to improve that. It also increases the overall road holding, and it lowers the weight a little bit. It's an improvement that generally, I try to put on all the cars I use, because it allows you to adjust it in the back as well. There are many fascinating things to explore with the rear adjustment, which we'll cover in a future video. Then, chassis reinforcement, safety roll bars. So overall, it increases the performance index of the game on these cars. So, here, you see we go from 500 to classified. That basically stiffens the chassis, and it also allows to unify quite a lot the roll. However, it generally increases weight significantly. So on this one, it's okay. It's only 38 kilograms of weight. But on some big cars, some big sedans, or large four-wheel drives, the weight you may lift with safety bars can reach nearly 100 kilograms. So, depending on what you want to do, it's not necessarily very useful to put that. Obviously, if your goal is just to make a car that goes fast in a straight line, it's not necessarily very useful in a turn. So, in those cases, it's better to leave this kind of original improvement. If you simply use acceleration and max speed, it's more interesting since you will have a lighter car. Then, you obviously have the weight reduction. Well, that's pretty logical. There isn't a downside, so to speak. No negative points about this car. The lighter the car, generally, the better it is. However, an excessively light car isn't ideal either. But so far, on Forza Horizon 5, I haven't really come across cars that were too light. It happened on Horizon 4, with the Pile for example, which was so light that it became ridiculous to drive. For the record, as long as you stay above 1,430 pounds overall, the cars remain quite manageable. And the more you lighten them, the more, generally, they are efficient. It's a very good improvement in lightening because it allows for better braking distance. It allows for better acceleration, also in road holding and sometimes even in top speed. And overall, it's sometimes more interesting to put this as an improvement to gain speed or acceleration, more than sometimes improving the engine. Depending on the case, it's for you to try. You then have the transmission improvement system. So there is the differential that changes nothing, or almost nothing in terms of statistics, but which will allow you to adjust the differential afterwards. For instance, on a four-wheel drive, having more power on the rear wheels compared to the front wheels. Solving road holding issues like understeering or oversteering can be very interesting. We'll discuss this further in a separate adjustment video. You have the transmission line, so overall, this is simply to save weight. So overall, the higher you put it, the better it is. There isn't really, let's say, a downside. You have the clutch, which also allows you to save a little bit of weight, while having faster gear shifting times. So here too, generally, the higher you can put it, the better it is. The gearbox system in Forza Horizon 5 has been improved, offering more choices compared to Forza Horizon 4. If I'm not mistaken, this base car is a car that is equipped with a 5-speed gearbox. It seems to depend on the models, but basically there are sports gearboxes and road gearboxes. It upgrades your gearbox without altering the number of gears. With the sport gearbox, you will have the ability to adjust the total gear ratio, so basically to manage the total length of your gear, and as a result, to have either more acceleration or maximum speed. We will inevitably have at least one 6-speed gearbox above that. That's going to be the case. Racing gearboxes that will allow you to adjust each gear, let's say one by one, so you can adjust the length of your first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Unlike the sports gearbox, which only allows, let's say, to adjust the general slider. Additionally, you will have the 7, 8, 9, and 10 gearboxes, which are available on many cars, which, as a result, generally allow for more gears, thus shorter gears, therefore, more responsive cars, but which, on the other hand, inevitably increase the weight of your car. So the increased weight is not really huge. It's roughly 2 kilos per additional gear. That can be quite interesting. That car there could have a 10-speed gearbox while still falling into category 500, which can be quite interesting. Depending on the models and your intended use for the car, you must choose wisely. Personally, I always put the race gearbox. I have so far never put a 7, 8, 9, or 10-speed gearbox. Because, overall, I find that the advantage, let's say, of shorter gears on this game is not sufficient compared to the weight that is gained. Finally, which is taken back due to that improvement. It's good for the style to say I drive a Golf that does 10 speeds, but it's not necessarily very interesting in terms of improvements. There are several types of improved rubbers. Original, road, sport, semi-slick. Horizon semi-slicks, which are the same as semi-slicks but with a Horizon logo. And sleek rubbers. So, that's going to be the rubbers, let's say classic. For driving on classic asphalt, there you go. These are not at all rubbers that are made for off-roading. And overall, more up, you can put these improvements better. So basically, the higher. Generally, it's sleek, however. The more you put tires like this one, and the more we will say the tires are smooth, as is the case with sleek tires. Driving a car equipped with slick tires on Forza Horizon 5 will be more challenging, especially on all terrains and in rainy conditions. If you have a track on asphalt, but it has rained or the road is wet, you will struggle much more to drive. In slick tire, for example, than in basic rubber, or in road rubber, or in sport rubber. So obviously, depending on the type of race, it will be more or less interesting. But overall, if you drive, let's say in good weather on the road, classic on asphalt, slick tires are those that provide the best grip. Then, you have the drift rubber, so that's quite logical, it's for those who want to drift. You have two types of all-terrain rubber. So it seems to me that this one, it must be the one that is designed for rally, if I'm not mistaken, and this one, it must be the one that is designed for cross-country. So, basically, to do jumps, to really do, let's say, very steep tracks, let's say the all-terrain rubbers, the rally rubbers, it's simply to have a good grip on earth. The driving style and event type differ, resulting in distinct improvements. You also have snow tires if you drive in snowy weather or visit the snowy volcano. Then there are drag rubbers, for those who do drag preps and want cars that accelerate as hard as possible. However, a major drawback of drag rubbers is their poor road holding at high speeds. It's really just for the straight line. If you have high-speed turns to make, it's not even worth pinching the drag rubbers. Similarly, I didn't say it, but for snow rubbers, a disadvantage is that when there is no snow, the grip is not as good. Quite simply, it's quite logical. Then, you have the possibility to improve the width of the tires, so that's quite interesting. Depending on the type of car you have, it allows you to have wider tires. So to keep better road holding and also to better transmit power to the ground. If your car has front-wheel drive, I recommend starting by increasing the width of the front tires to improve traction. For rear-wheel drive, start with the rear tire width. For four-wheel drive, mix the widths of front and rear tires. There is still a small disadvantage with these wider tires. It's that a car that actually has wider tires will be, let's say, more easily controllable. You will lose control less often. You will, for example, drift less. Conversely, wider tires make it more difficult to regain control of the car if it starts to go haywire. So, indeed, if you have wider tires, you have less chance of going haywire. However, if you drive poorly or enter a tight turn too quickly, regaining control of the car with wider tires will be much more challenging. Then you have the improvements to the rims. So here, style, obviously, is going to matter. But there are also rims that will allow you to save weight. Everyone will do as they wish, indeed. The goal remains finding light rims that are stylish. Some rims are stylish, some are light, and some are both light and stylish. Of course, it will change based on your tastes. Apart from the weight, it doesn't significantly impact the remaining road handling. You then indeed have the option to choose the size of the rims, so larger rims. It improves road handling in the game but increases weight, resulting in reduced acceleration and speed. And then, on some cars, you also have the option to choose the track width. Basically, to choose the gap, let's say between the wheels in width. I advise you to max it out when you have the chance. When you do racing on asphalt, classic racing, however, when you do rally or when you do racing on dirt or off-road, do not put the improved track width. Generally, it makes the cars strafe even more and you're going to lose time. Finally, there are obviously the aesthetic parts, so there too, it's a bit like the rims. You have to try to find a compromise between something that pleases you aesthetically and something that is interesting in terms of performance. Overall, there are plenty of kits available on this game that will allow you to lose weight, but which, generally, as a result, will harm the aerodynamics, for example, of the car. There are also Forza kits with this small logo, which are honestly not very attractive. Well, especially the wings in general, the Forza wings. Again, it's okay. In general, on most cars, the Forza wings and Forza parts kits are not very attractive. However, they greatly increase the car's downforce, so basically, it holds the road at high speed, and especially, it allows you to adjust the car's downforce. So you end up having a slider that either goes towards more VMAX or towards more road holding. I know that often, when I put it on, people tell me it's ugly and that I shouldn't do it. But, of course, if I'm going for a circuit and I'm just looking for an efficient car, generally the Forza kit is my friend and I don't hesitate to put it on, since there are lots of bonuses behind it. If you're looking for a stylish car, the Forza kit generally isn't very attractive. So, we've more or less covered the improvement of the different parts of the cars in Forza Horizon 5. Obviously, there is a change on electric cars. Instead of having engine improvements, you will directly have an improved engine in the conversion. Here, personally, it's like that on the Taken and on, I believe, the IDR. I know I've seen it on another electric car, I just can't remember which one. Apart from that, it works pretty much the same way, whether it's a thermal car or an electric car, obviously. So that was a bit of the first part, explaining what each piece does. Obviously, if I've forgotten anything, don't hesitate to ask me for more info in the comments. With so much information to cover about this type of video, it's inevitable that I'll forget something at some point. If I ever find other things, I'll add them to the editing, but if I've still forgotten some topics, leave your questions in the comments and I will answer them. Next, we'll briefly discuss how I improve my cars in various ways depending on my mood. Sometimes, I also enjoy driving them without any improvements because it's generally the best experience. Let's call it original because the car is completely authentic and has its own unique character, which is absolutely perfect. Then, there are days when I improve, just like a fool, and then I try to find the best compromise thanks to the adjustment. That happens too, but there are also many times when I just want a car that excels in a specific category. And in those cases, you will indeed have to take several things into account. There are several factors to have a good car in this or that category. What I generally advise you when you want to improve a car for this or that category is not to aim for more than 2 categories above that of the production car. So, here we have a car that is in category 500 from the series above, so there is category 100 and category B. Indeed, I think this car can be interesting at the maximum of category B. However, I'm not convinced that it's very interesting in A or in 1. Even though, indeed, if we compare this car in A, in S, and in B, it will inevitably be faster in S, except that it will not necessarily be as competitive as other cars, which originally were in category A or in UN, or even which were in Class B and have been improved to A or S1. Simply, a little car like this, a little bit old, can be cool for the fact that it's light, that it has a little engine a bit peppy. And even if, indeed, with the improvements, it can go up to A or S, in my opinion, to A or S. Anyway, it won't have the right road holding to handle that much power. And anyway, it might not even have enough power to compete with the other cars in this category. Typically, I set myself 2 classes above and start by improving based on the car's statistics. So, if I see that it already has good speed and acceleration, I will start by improving the tires, by improving the weight. This is the case with this car here, which has rather good speed and acceleration stats, while the handling and braking are a bit below. So I'm simply going to start by improving the lowest statistic. So here, for example, it's the braking. We're going to try to put it in race kit to catch up a bit with the speed gauge and the acceleration gauge. Then, in terms of handling, I see that the car is a little high. I see that the handling is not exceptionally high either. So we're going to switch to springs. So we're not necessarily going to put the races, but we're at least going to put the sports. This will allow for slightly more homogeneous statistics. Then, we're obviously going to lighten the car as much as possible. So that's an improvement, as I was telling you earlier, which is really interesting because it improves acceleration, handling, and braking, even if the statistics don't say it. Here, let's say we have a red arrow pointing down. Normally that's considered negative, but that's not the case at all here. So it's quite an interesting improvement then. I generally improve the tires. So here, for the moment, we already have, let's say, a handling that is quite correct with the stage route. So we're going to set it like this, and then, for what remains, we're going to improve the engine. And then, we're going to improve the engine to increase the acceleration a little bit and increase the speed a little bit. In short, it's about setting goals to reach a specific category. And then, it's about starting to compensate for the statistics that are the least good. So, in general, it's often about this kind of car, the handling, the braking, and then to complete the missing performance index points with engine improvements. In general, it gives you quite a good result. Then, indeed, if by improving the engine, you realize that the speed and acceleration statistic starts to take over the rest. Well, it's not quite the case yet, but I think with a few more improvements it will be. Well, in those cases, don't hesitate to revisit the platform improvements, handling, and, for example, put in the anti-roll bars. These improvements generally enhance the car's performance and behavior quite well. And it takes, let's say, not a lot of performance indicators. Plus, on this one, we might even be able to put the safety notch chassis reinforcement. Even if we regain some weight, we will have a body that will still be, let's say, a bit more homogeneous in terms of statistics. And then, we can even slightly improve the gearbox, so there, it can be interesting to try to switch it to a race kit. That way, we will have 6 gears, and we can therefore adjust each gear independently. Then, why not? The transmission line, the clutch as well, it's the same. These are improvements that bring a lot to the car without taking up many index points. Performance. Then, how much power do we have? We have 230 horses. We can put slightly wider tires at the front, not at the maximum to avoid moving into category A, but we can at least put them on the front. In 215, we'll have better grip and turns and improved power transmission to the ground. And then, we have 4 performance index points left. So, here, we're going to look for a small engine improvement that will allow us to go to B700, without actually going into category A. And it might be a bit of a hassle to find, because when you're missing a point, sometimes it's a bit tricky. What can we put in to improve? Just by 1 point, we can put the flywheel, which will then allow us to be in B700, with, as a result, statistics that are quite homogeneous. So you see between 4.2 and 5.9 for braking, so quite a balanced car. And in addition, the best stat is a handling stat, the braking stat. So it's rather a good thing. So overall, that's what I do. I look at the car's basic performance list. I tell myself 2 categories above max. And then I start with the improvements that are the weakest. It's pointless to have a very powerful car, to have 10, for example, in acceleration and max speed. If you can't turn at the first opportunity, the chassis won't be able to handle such high speeds anyway. On the contrary, it's pointless to have a car with exceptional road holding. If behind, it lacks power and gets washed out from the first straight line. Generally, for most circuits, a balanced car is really what works best. If you're doing drag racing, it's smarter to use drag tires for better power and acceleration. Contrarily, if you're doing a very small circuit, like the one at the Forza Horizon 5 festival, which is right here. In those cases, when you don't have a straight line, well, indeed, there, for the record, just bet a little bit on acceleration and a lot on road holding. But overall, for most of the game's circuits, a balanced car, that's what works best. In Forza Horizon 5, car improvement is less important than in Horizon 4 due to the absence of ranked mode. And the competitive side of Forza Horizon 5 is still, let's say, inferior to that of Forza Horizon 4, very much so. So, I hope this video has helped you. I hope it wasn't too long. I've been recording for an hour, but the final video will likely be around 20-25 minutes. It's longer than usual, but there's a lot of content to cover. Well, for once, I didn't see making 2 different episodes without improvement. It was a lot, I think, for a subject that I think could be treated in a single video. Tell me a little bit if this video helped you in the comments. Don't hesitate to tell me. If I forgot some things, well, there you go, but it's not in the comments. If I forgot some types of improvement, if I forgot some details, don't hesitate to think about leaving a like under this video. It's always a pleasure. It supports the channel, especially on this kind of little guide that can be slightly promoted by YouTube afterwards. Strong Horizon 5 players, subscribe without hesitation. Similarly, these are new ones like this, the next tutorials on the settings, for example, or on drifting, on driving. The next content that you will propose on the game, you will be notified of their release. Of course, if you're interested, you can come follow me on Twitch to be notified of my live. You will find my Twitch channel in the description and a top comment on this video. Feel free to come follow.